welcome to episode 3 of Average Ontario Anglers. So I'm your host today, Andrew, with my co-host, Jesse. So our main topic today that we're going to be discussing is about fishing lines. The three main ones, we got mono, fluorocarbon, and braid. Initially, we're going to start off with our interesting fishing fact. At the end of the episode, we're going to have our question and answer, our AOA Q&A. We're also going to announce the winner of our giveaway, which was that spider lure. And we're also going to be posting later on in the next coming weeks or so. Always keep posted for whenever we're asking for more questions to get entered into those draws yourself. But as for today, Jesse's going to surprise me with another interesting fishing fact, and we'll see if it lives up to its title of interesting.
Well, this one's not insanely interesting, but it is interesting.
And we're cutting that out. All right.
But anyway, this week is it's very Ontario based. So I thought I'd do an interesting fishing fact about the Trent Severn Waterway.
Ooh,
does that sound interesting?
My interest is piqued.
Okay, good. So if you're not aware, the Trent Severn Waterway, it's a canal route that connects Lake Ontario all the way up to Georgian Bay or Lake Huron. I have questions for Andrew to guess, because he's not going to know the exact answer, but I want to know if he can get close. But this waterway has been called one of the finest interconnected systems of navigation in the world.
Was that called by the actual people who take that, or?
No, that was from the Parks Canada website. So
a little biased in his statement.
But anyway, who knows who called it that, but that's what they said. But anyway, so it goes all the way from Lake Ontario all the way up to Lake Huron. What is the length in kilometers, do you think? If you were to drive from one end to the other, how many kilometers would it be?
I don't know. I'm gonna be like, is it 10? You know.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably 1,200 kilometers.
No one will judge you if you get it wrong.
1,200 kilometers?
No. 386 kilometers.
Okay.
Andrew's an overachiever. It's okay. But anyway, 386 kilometers. That's a lot.
It is.
That's, if you were to drive that in a car, that would be, almost 4 hours, depending on who's driving. But the fun fact is, at full throttle in my sports POW with my 2.5 horsepower engine, going 11 kilometers an hour,
he can rip through those no wake zones.
It would take 35 hours to make this run, not counting going through the locks.
This is going to be the next year's AOA big film project of canoeing the Trent Severn Waterway.
Journey of a lifetime. 386 kilometers. That's pretty crazy. And it can hold boats up to 84 feet long. So boats up to 84, and believe me, I've been
huge.
fishing on the Otonabee in my canoe, and big, huge cruisers come through there, and I'm like, holy crap.
That's got to be super tight in places, because I know, I've been in my parents' boat, and they just have a small little bow rider, it's 16 feet long, a little less than 16 feet long, and that fits no problem. But you're in there in a lock with, 3 other boats. You barely have space. It seems so close.
Well, I'm sure the 84-foot boats get the lock to themselves. But did you know that there are, not 84, there is 44 locks. Wow. 44 locks. And in some places, these are some of the places that it runs through. And these are a lot of lakes that, maybe you fish these areas, because you can fish all through here. Rice Lake, the Otonabee River, I fish both those. Yeah. Lovesick Lake. Fish. I'm just naming the ones that I've.
And that goes through up to Balsam and
Buckhorn, Cameron, Pigeon, Sturgeon, Cameron Lake, Lake Simcoe. Yeah. It runs through a lot of lakes. It's crazy. Yeah. So the history behind it is the first lock was built in 1833, and that's 190 years ago, if my math is correct. And it's slowly continued. It's actually interesting. I'm not going to get into it, but the history of why they decided to build it was because of, they wanted to have, commercial ships going up to Lake Huron and be able to ship military fast. So it actually took, it was very slow. They built a lock, then they stopped, then they built another one. So it actually took till 1920. So almost 100 years to build all this. Wow. When it was finally completed and they did the first run. And the funny thing is, so this route was originally created for commercial shipping. But by the time that it opened in the 1920s, the commercial ships were massive. So I guess at the time they were like, oh, this will be big enough. And then finally it took them 100 years to do. And by then the ships were huge. So now they're like, well,
it's no longer just trappers' furs and stuff.
So they couldn't fit a ship through anyway. So now it's mostly used by, fishermen and pleasure craft route. So I thought that was pretty funny that all this work happened basically for nothing. Now it is nice to be able to get from place to place, but it has also led to a lot of like invasive species like pike getting into certain places. But you know what? Whenever people get mad and say, "Oh, there was never pike in this lake before, those dumb pike," it's like, well, it's kind of our fault.
Yeah,
we connected all the lakes, so blame ourselves or blame the people from 1840 or whatever the heck.
A little sidebar, because just like history. So I know the one thing my parents. They get really excited when they go to the locks about the lift locks. There's one in Peterborough area, I believe.
Yeah.
So that like there's literally two giant pails of water, and they'll like lift the boat straight up, and you carry on this waterway. Like it's crazy
Just
how they built this.
Looking at it is cool.
So that makes sense why there's so many different. There's overland locks where you're on like a little rail car that goes over on some of them. So it makes sense that it's built over the course of over 100 years. Technology changed so much in that time as to like what's the best way to transport a ship over these certain areas between lakes. So it's kind of cool. That's why it's so different in its operations from lock to lock. That's actually makes a lot more sense.
It took so long to build.
That's crazy.
And now we just use it for basically fishing. So anyway,
except you can't fish in the locks. Come on,
not
people.
in the locks, but around them. But anyway, how interesting would you say that is?
I like history, so that's gotta rate it pretty high. I'd say it's an 8 out of 10.
Okay, last week we used letter grades.
Yeah, that's you. I use numbers.
Okay. Sounds good. So anyway, that was my interesting fishing fact. So stay tuned for next week when we actually have another interesting fishing fact that maybe you will find interesting.
Only because I'm giving it. No. All right, so on to our main topic of today, which is fishing lines. So like I said at the beginning, there's three main ones. You've got braid, you've got monofilament, and you have fluorocarbon are the three most popular lines out there that you can use that you're going to find in any tackle shop you go into. A lot of questions that people have. There's a lot of misinformation about them, especially between fluorocarbon and mono. A lot of different people have different ideas as to what is best to use when. What are the benefits of certain lines to others, and I even did some research on how it's made because I like random crap like that. So we're going to have a lot of information for you today to hopefully help you narrow down what you're looking to do when you're on the lake, what you want to use, when you want to use it, where you want to use it, because again our whole goal here with the podcast is to be able to give you information that you can then take to wherever your local water is, make use of it, and hopefully catch more fish with that. So that's our goal. So, Jesse, what is your favorite line? That's
such a loaded.
You can't answer that question because
it depends. There's too many variables.
Fair. It's not fair.
There's too many variables.
It's not fair. You can't really say like, oh, if you had to pick one line, what would it be? There's so many different types of lines and manufacturers and whatnot, and to choose just one line of like, oh, like I will only ever use braid, like it's not conducive because braid has its strengths, but it also has its weaknesses. So just kind of like to start off the show, first off, I thought it'd be good to talk about kind of the history. We'll do a little bit of talking of each of the ones. So braid is actually one of the oldest lines around. Like it has been one of the oldest fishing lines used for hundreds of years is braided line. Back in the day, they would use natural materials like cotton or linen. The issue with that is anytime it was used, it would have to be stretched out and dried, or else it would rot on the spool.
Oh, imagine how time consuming that'd be. After every day of fishing, you had to dry your line out.
Imagine how your car would smell with all those people who just throw their rod in the back window of that car.
Oh,
that would be disgusting. So, braid has been around for a long time. So in more modern times, of course, we're not using cotton linen. They also had some like silk. The first non 100% natural braided line, they actually mixed certain chemicals and essentially coated silk braided line. Was the first non 100% natural braided line to be on the market. But nowadays they have like it's all synthetic. So they have Dacron, Spectra, Microdyneema are all the different composites essentially that go into a braided line that we have today. So for yourself, Jesse, what do you like? Do you use braid? What do you like to use? Or what applications do you like to use braid in?
I think braid is one of those things that a lot of people will just be like, well, I'll just put braid on my rod and just use it. Because like, again, you can catch any dumb fish on braid. a lot of fish, they don't really care if they see your line or they're dumb, right? So like, I feel like
I mainline braid a lot.
Yeah, like, and we'll get into that more. And I feel like you can do that. So I feel like that's why a lot of people just use it for everything.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people, no offense to them, they'll be like, "Oh, bastard, dumb. You can just use straight braid." But the reality is, you can't sometimes. Like, maybe don't you think if you use something else that you might catch more fish than you already do?
And it doesn't all come down to just can the fish see it or not. There's other factors why you'd want to use a different line.
And I feel like a lot of people, I get people that message me on Instagram and stuff, they have a lot of like deep-seated opinions that are based basically on nothing, just their own opinion.
Yeah.
So like they'll be like, "Oh, fluorocarbon's a waste of money," and then they'll be like, "This is why and this is why," and then I'll be like, "There's 3 other reasons why it can be good." But anyway, braided line I use for generally heavy vegetation. Like if I'm punching, frogging, fishing around, any kind of weeds. It's not really good around wood as much. I do like it for topwater fishing.
Yep.
With, I'll use a little monofilament leader just so the trebles don't get all, caught in the braid is so limp it just wraps around the hooks. But anytime that I need, ultimate power to get fish out, especially weeds, like largemouth bass fishing, 90% of the time, I'm using braid.
Yeah.
And it's so thin. It cuts through weeds so good.
Yeah. So in this episode, you're going to hear a lot of our opinions on what we like to use. Again, you may not agree with them. That's completely fine.
You can make a podcast yourself and tell us your opinion.
But you're also going to hear a lot of stuff, like not so much the science behind, but the facts about it. Like, so for example, braid, it's going to be much smaller diameter for a higher tensile strength. So like 30-pound braid is the same thickness of, I think, 8-pound mono.
Yeah.
Like it's insane. So you can hold way more line at a 30-pound strength rating, which its breaking strength is probably closer to 40.
Yep.
And now if you're fishing heavy cover and you've got a shallow spool in your bait caster or a smaller spinning rod that you're trying to fish these lakes in, then braid might be a good option because you can fit more line than if you wanted to put on 20-30-pound fluorocarbon or mono. You're barely going to get any on your spool with a standard size reel. So by switching to braid and just running a small leader after that, if you decide, you're going to get your proper amount of line on there with the strength that you need. So that's one of the benefits. The downside to braid is it's the poorest for abrasion resistance. Because it's made up of so many like small fibers, you get like 6 strand, 8 strand braid. Whenever it's rubbing against something, if it damages one of those fibers, it loses a lot of its strength, integrity. It doesn't really get like deformed. It doesn't stretch either. So it's good because it's very sensitive. You can really detect bites really well with it. It floats. But at the same time, the flip side of it not stretching is when you're fighting a fish, immediate impact strength. Like if you're setting the hook on something, you're using 30-pound braid, but that would probably snap a lot quicker on a heavy hook set than 12 or 14-pound mono would if you're using 30-pound braid, because there's no stretch. All of a sudden it's trying to move this like 4-pound bass and you reef on it, you're exerting like 50-60 pounds on that line instantly right at the knot.
And you can easily snap braid on a hook set.
Yeah,
it happens.
If you're trying like, how strong is line, you wrap around your fingers and pull, you'll just slice your hand open with braid.
Yeah.
So again, there's pros and cons to both. And we'll, at the end of the episode, I want to go over kind of just a list of the pros and cons for all the lines again.
Yep.
But yes, that's essentially braid. That's a brief rundown on it. We'll talk more about overall. Monofilament. So that was the next line that was manufactured after they started using more modern materials with the braid. They started making monofilament. Monofilament is actually a nylon line. Monofilament is one filament, one strand, single strand line. That's literally what it means. So it's monofilament isn't an actual material. It's describing what the line is. It's actually a nylon line. So that was invented in 1937. Was when mono started to be produced for fishing line. Now for mono, some of its qualities, it stretches. It is almost neutral buoyancy. It has very good abrasion resistance comparative to we're talking about fishing lines here, not like if you rub it against a knife, guess what? It's going to cut it. But abrasion resistance, it's higher than braid for sure. It does have stretch. it's not as sensitive because it's probably the least sensitive line out there for depending on what you're using. Of course, if you're using 80-pound mono, it's not going to stretch very hard for that. But at the same time, it's not going to be sensitive at that thickness either. The strength versus the size, it doesn't have a high ratio. It's mono and fluorocarbon are very similar in a lot of aspects, with just some minor differences in reality. So that's kind of some of the characteristics of monofilament or nylon line. So I know you and I, we grow up fishing mono. That's what we had. You look at if you go to your grandpa's rod right now, I can guarantee you're going to find some blue strand monofilament on it. Yep. So that stuff, like, people have been using it for years. Definitely don't cast that. Change that line now for your grandpa. Do him a favor. Change that line so he doesn't snap off in his next fish.
Yeah. And mono, it's not the best line for a lot of things, but it's very inexpensive. It's strong.
Yep.
There are pros to it. And to add to the mono, you can also add a subcategory of copolymers. Say a line like Trilene XL or XT. Those are monofilaments, but then you get
Technically, fluorocarbon is a monofilament, is a single filament line.
We should tell them that. Maybe they'll make it cheaper.
So you said it was copolymers, right?
Copolymers. So you're thinking
they're
about
actually
lines...
closer to the fluoro because they're designed, again, to be slightly more invisible.
Yeah.
In the water spectrum than mono. Again, that's one of the slight differences between the two, but yes, they're kind of in between monofilament and fluorocarbon. But because it's not the actual material of fluorocarbon, it's just considered monofilament.
True, and usually they're different. They're similar.
Yeah.
So, there's lines like Trilene Sensation, or Suffix Advance, which is a line that I use all the time for a lot of things. And it has a little bit less stretch than a mono. It still has stretch, but a little bit less. Still a lot of abrasion resistance, and it's very inexpensive. So that's another good option.
And we're going to be getting into the stretching a little bit as to why certain lines stretch more or less, and how that can be actually altered by the manufacturer. But when would you, if you had to recommend to someone like a good application to use mono in, what would you recommend to use it? Like, what species or what kind of style of fishing would you say, you know what, mono is a good option for
mono is an excellent option for carp fishing. Excellent. I know a lot of people will be like, you know what, carp are huge, I'm going to use braid. Depends where you fish. Like, if you fish a weedy bay, that's probably a good option. But I fish with a lot of carp guys, and they all use mono, and I'm like, why are you using mono? And they're like, rocks, mussels, all these like things that are down where you're fishing for carp, like in Lake Ontario. It shreds through the braided line.
I lost more carp on 50-pound braid than I did on 17-pound mono.
Exactly. And for me, 17 was good. 20, it's very strong. It's abrasion resistant, and there's lots of stretch, so it's really good shock absorption for fishing these big fish. And any live bait situation, I'd say, like if you're fishing for catfish or what are those stupid things called? Bowfin, carp, even like bass, walleye and stuff. If you're using live bait, mono is a great option.
And if you're a weekend angler and you're not out there and you're let's say you're not tournament angling and you just want to go out, you're casting crankbaits, you're fishing under a bobber, mono will get the job done. Like, no issue. Mono will work completely fine for you.
Yeah.
So, it's your cheapest option for line out there, and it's 100%. Like, I've been using it for years. It's been around for decades. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, even, there are pros, they're fishing, some pros still like love fishing thick mono for flipping and pitching. Yeah.
They're rare, but they're still out there. And I think one of the main things about mono is its ease of use.
Yeah.
It's not all
easy knots to learn as well. The fishing knot that everyone thinks of when they think of, like, oh, the Rapala knot, or the clinch knot, the Trilene knot. Those knots, they work great with mono and fluorocarbon.
Some of them.
If you try and use that on braid,
it'll slip so fast.
It's done. So a lot of people, they shy away from braid because they find it difficult. But there are some great videos. I know Roland Martin, he has some really good videos on I like his because they're good quality and you can see the knots he's tying, and he does a good job of explaining the difference and why you'd want to use, why a certain knot won't work for braid and why it will work for braid. So I did like his videos on YouTube if you're looking for something like that.
So I think one thing to add is, like you said, crankbaits.
Yes.
One combo that I do, I got a Mojo Bass Glass crankbait rod last year, and I loved using it. And I'll use mono. Like, that's my choice of line. Like, I know a lot of people throw crankbaits on fluorocarbon, but for me, if I'm using, a DT10 or something that dies around 10 feet or something, I'm just using 10-pound mono. Gets the job done for me. It's really stretchy. That's my choice of line for that application, and it's not expensive line. Like, just get some Trilene XL and it works good.
Yep. Yeah, Trilene Sensation. Like, I love Sensation. I've used that stuff for years.
Yeah.
So moving on to fluorocarbon then. Fluorocarbon is made of compound vinylidene fluoride resin.
It sounds like toothpaste.
It has the word fluoride in it. There's fluoride. But it's shortened down to fluorocarbon. So it was invented in 1970. So a huge gap between 1937 for mono and 1970 for fluorocarbon. It kind of took the fishing world by storm. Like, it caught on pretty quick. And now, you hear all these people saying, oh, mono absolutely sucks. Fluorocarbon is the best. It's better in every single way. That's not 100% true. You'll hear some of the things. So this is where I want to get into, like, line stretch. One of the biggest things that I've heard, I'm sure you agree,
it's a myth.
Jesse,
biggest myth on
fluorocarbon doesn't stretch. That's why it's more sensitive than mono. Incorrect. Big X.
Or they'll say, oh, fluorocarbon has very little stretch.
Yeah.
All the pros will say that.
Fluorocarbon is invisible underwater. Technically, it's not. So we'll start off with a stretch as a myth. So to say that fluorocarbon doesn't stretch is incorrect. On average, fluorocarbon will stretch 30% of its length. Mono will stretch 30% of its length. They stretch the same amount. The difference is when you have simple numbers here. So if you have a 10-pound mono and you start pulling it at 1 pound strength or 1 pound of exertion, it starts to stretch. And it will continue to stretch until 10 pounds and then will snap. But all along from 1% to 100% of that weight, it's stretching the whole time. Instant stretch. Fluorocarbon will not start stretching until you're putting 5 pounds of pressure. 50% of its weight rating has to be exerted on it before it starts to stretch. Once it starts to stretch, it still stretches to 30% of its length, but it's only in the last 50% of its weight rating that it does all of its stretching. So if you're trying to detect bites, fluorocarbon will be more sensitive than mono because there's no stretch to the fluorocarbon on such a light bite. When you set the hook and you're fighting that fish, it's stretching 100%. Another big difference with the stretch is mono is more elastic than the fluorocarbon. So mono, you can't overstretch it, and you'll feel it. If you grab, some 12-pound mono or 10-pound mono even, the thicker it's easier, and you stretch that out, and you can pull it out, and it'll release back. It'll relax back into its original length. Fluorocarbon can do that as well, but essentially fluorocarbon, once it starts to stretch out, it remains at that length. So it is then weaker and will have less stretch the next time it's used. Mono, you can overstretch it as well. So when you overstretch it, it won't release back to its full form, and you'll feel it's actually a narrow diameter. And essentially what's happening is it's similar to when it's manufactured. It will anneal itself, it's called. So it's heating itself up because it's pulling those molecules apart, and now it will, as it cools again at that temperature, it's cannot relax to its original state anymore. It has been stretched so far that it's heated to the temperature where that is now its solid state. So both are the same, but fluorocarbon, it is more accurate or what's the word I'm saying again? Sensitive.
Yeah.
For detecting bites, but for fighting a fish, it still has stretch. So that is a huge plus for why it's advantageous.
And just to add to the sensitivity, and this is the main thing that I tell people, I don't care that it's invisible, so to say, or very clear. Yep. There are techniques that the sensitivity of fluorocarbon is way better than braid. People are like, oh, braid doesn't stretch. It has the best sensitivity. Braid is wispy and floats.
Yeah.
So like say you're fishing a bait and you cast it out and it sinks straight to the bottom. Your braid is slowly sinking down. Fluorocarbon is dense.
Fluorocarbon sinks.
It sinks down.
Mono is almost neutral. It's barely sinks. It's almost considered neutral buoyancy. Braid floats, mono's almost neutral. Fluorocarbon does sink. So if you are fishing like jigs and stuff like that.
It gives you a direct connection.
It'll sit right down.
And if you don't think that having a direct connection to a light bait down at the bottom where your line is sinking down and is tight to the bait doesn't make a difference, then I don't know what to tell you.
But then, like we were saying before, like we'll use monofilament for carp because you don't need to feel for a bite. We're using a hair rig or like a bolt rig. The carp comes along, it picks up the hook, tries to run, hits that bolt rig, it sets the hook itself right into the side of its face, and it's going. Like, we don't need to feel that. It just does it. Or bobber fishing, you're having visual strike. Again, not to say you can't feel any bites with mono, but if you're, if you're crankbait fishing and you're reeling in, there's constant tension on your line, you're gonna feel it when a fish hits it. 100%.
Yeah. Like any reaction bait, like spinner bait, buzz bait, top water, anything you just cast and reel in.
So
you can use mono. You'll feel the bite.
I wouldn't say at all that you're at a disadvantage for having mono in any of those applications.
Yeah.
But if you're, jig fishing, you're pitching and fishing, or flipping and pitching, fluoro will, like Jesse said, give you direct contact to that bait a lot better. So again, on those bites, there won't be stretch. Same with braid. Braid does float, so again, it might not be the best in some of those applications. But fishing really heavy cover, you got a heavy tungsten weight on there anyways. You're gonna feel that regardless.
Yeah.
So again, weigh your pros and cons for what type of fishing you're doing with what line you're choosing. If I can, I want to get into a little bit too as to how fluorocarbon and monofilament is made. To show their similarities, it's different material. So one is nylon, the other one is fluorocarbon. I'll use the simpler terms. They're both made essentially the same way. So they come in pellet form to the factory. They melt them down. They then extrude them through a small hole to create a single filament of this line. What they do then is they will they cool it, then they heat it again, they stretch it as it's heated. What that does is as they stretch it while it's in that hot state, it aligns all the molecules. So you can imagine they're all kind of jumbled together, but as soon as they start stretching that line, it all kind of evens out and they align themselves into that single line. That gives it strength along that whole length of the line. Then they heat it, they let it cool a bit, they heat it again to a specific temperature in what's called the annealing oven, and that is essentially what locks in that diameter of line, and that, so it's weight rating, and it's so that it's not going to relax back into a different shape or the different molecular shape. They stay aligned in that row. So by that annealing oven, it relaxes those molecules to prevent the line from shrinking back down. Now, to get different weight ratings, all they do is they stretch it more or less. The more they stretch it, the thinner the line's going to be, the lighter gauge it's going to be. They do the same thing with fluorocarbon, made the exact same way. Again, just different material. And whenever they have to have some lines be more stretchy or less stretchy, like I said, the average is about 30% for both mono and fluoro. But they can change at what temperature they heat that annealing oven to. That changes how much the line is going to stretch. How relaxed those molecules are when it's finished as manufacturing will determine how much stretch that line has. So you can get some mono that has a lot less stretch. It'll break easier. Same with the fluoro, a lot less stretch, it can break easier, but it's going to be more sensitive. Or you can have it with a lot of stretch.
Fine line to find the perfect ratio between being able to stretch a lot and being sensitive. Because you could go either way could be bad.
Yep.
Too stretchy or snaps, it's too brittle.
Yeah. So that's why generally, unless it's stated otherwise in the package, it's about 30% of the length. So that's, again, simple numbers. You've got 10 feet of line out. If you stretch it, it'll stretch 3 feet. Is that right? No, you got 100. Yeah, 30%. 3 feet. It'll stretch 3 feet, and then it will snap. It reaches a breaking strength at that point in time. So that's, you think, that's 10 feet, extra 3 feet on that. Like, we've snagged, and you bomb a cast out with some 17-pound mono, you're fishing for carp, and Jesse hooked into this snag out there like 60 feet away.
I walked back like 50 feet before the thing snapped.
You can't get it.
Yeah.
So that's some of the benefits with it. Now, so when you're looking at abrasion, braid is at its biggest disadvantage. Monofilament and fluoro, they are better at abrasion resistance, both of them. For stretch, braid has no stretch. Mono is all stretch. from the get-go as soon as pressure is applied, and fluoro has stretch kind of at the last 50% of its weight rating. For sensitivity, Braid and fluoro for bite detection are going to be your best. Again, Braid doesn't stretch at all, so it's 100% sensitive. Your best strength for size ratio is going to be Braid. Monofilament and fluoro, they're going to be thicker. They're both about the same. And Braid floats, monofilament is neutral buoyancy, and fluorocarbon will sink. So that's kind of, if you can understand those basic principles of the different line, that helps you then be able to know what you want to do. So for me personally, when I'm out fishing, most of the time I run Braid, but I will also run a leader. I'll often just use a mono leader because I don't like spending a whole lot of money. But if I'm using, let's say, straight mono on my reel, again, it stretches. So if I cast out 50 feet, it's going to stretch a lot. I won't have very much bite detection. But if I'm fishing, 30-pound braid or 20-pound braid, and then I tie on a 10-foot mono leader, there's a lot less stretch in that small section of mono than it would be if I had my whole spool was all mono, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one way where you can still get some of the advantage when you're fighting a fish. I'm no longer fighting on just straight braid. I have the rod flexing. I also have that 10 feet of mono that gives me up to 3 feet of stretch before it breaks. That's a lot of extra play that I can have on something where, I don't want to have that high tensile breaking strength of braid all the time. But I have a heavy gauge line that I can use in a lot of applications that lasts a lot longer on your spool than mono and fluoro does.
Yeah, like you can have braid on your reel for years.
Yeah,
literally years.
But again, braid, you always take a look. If you're starting to see it fray, it gets weak really fast. Yeah. So whenever you catch a fish, any line too, not to say that monofilament and fluorocarbon are completely abrasion resistant, they aren't. But if you catch a fish, especially like if it's a toothy critter, like you got pike or muskie, that can 100% it'll nick your line, and now it's weakened 100%. If you're fishing around timber, and every few casts or after your morning, inspect your line. Even if you haven't caught any fish, but you've been fishing around weeds, you get a snag in the rocks and you pull it up. You cast it over a log, you drag the line over. Just grab the line, run your finger over it, see if there's any fraying on your braid, see if you feel any nicks with your fingertips on your mono, on your fluoro. Take the time, just retie at that point, because there's no worse feeling than snapping off later.
And especially like when we're muskie fishing, after you catch a muskie, check that leader, check the knot, make sure everything's legit. You wouldn't want to, spend so much time and effort to actually finally hook a muskie and then have your leader snap or your knot snap off. Like, always double check. It's literally will save you from the worst feeling you'll ever have. The gut punch when you miss a muskie and it snaps your line. Haven't had it yet, but I'm sure it's a terrible feeling.
There is a kind of a fourth type of line. It's not as common these days, but you can actually get wire. So some of the old trolling reels and stuff like that, they would commonly fill them with even copper wire. Yeah. But you can, oftentimes you might not have your full spool of it, but you'll often have a wire leader. And I know we grew up fishing for pike, because pike have, sharp teeth and they're like razor blades. They will slice through your line. They're not just sharp on the point. They're like knife edges. So if you're fishing for pike or for muskie, any of the Essex family of fish, braid, they'll slice through super easy. Super easy.
Very easy, yeah.
You can actually run a thicker gauge. Like the lightest I'd go is probably like 50, 60. If I'm fishing for pike, I'd probably go like 80-pound fluorocarbon.
I know guys that use like 40.
Yeah,
and it can be done. They get bit off occasionally, but most of the time they don't.
So that's again showing the abrasive resistance to some capability. But again, you catch a fish on a fluorocarbon leader, you can inspect it after. The benefit of, which I really like fluorocarbon leaders for now, which we are now using. I don't even own wire leaders anymore.
I use wire for bucktails because the vibration is different. But generally speaking, I'd say like 80% of the time we're using fluoro.
So fluorocarbon is, I like it because the wire kinked a lot, and I found that would impede the action of a lot of my baits of having this like super kinked up wire leader. You catch one fish on it, even if it's like a tiny 14-inch hammer handle pike, and now your leader's all bent to pieces. Yeah, and it sucked. So having the fluorocarbon leader, if I use a thicker gauge, I can land multiple fish on one leader without any risk Like, I don't feel any risk of that thing snapping. I
Especially
was skeptical at first because I'm like, they cut through my mono all the time, but I'm using 10-pound mono or fluoro. If you're using like a thicker gauge line,
130-pound fluoro.
yeah, for musky, yeah, like 120.
And I know
plus.
a lot of musky guys are like, "Oh, you're dumb. I would never trust fluoro." It's pretty much the industry standard now to use like 120 to 150 pound fluorocarbon. No one would use it if they got bit off.
Because I have had less issues with fluorocarbon. No, I've been using them a lot less. I'll say that. So this might be skewed, ratio overall. But I have had multiple wire leaders get cut or snap because they're kinked.
Yeah, happens all the time.
They can break too. They're not indestructible.
And you can't.
And I've had the terminal tackle on wire leaders. I've had that fail so much more often than the tackle that I found on the fluorocarbon leaders. They're usually a bit more expensive, the flow leaders, but I find the swivel, the snap on it, they're better quality than I find on a lot of the, even, the ball bearing swivel wire leaders that I would get. I found that the fluorocarbon ones are a lot more, resilient to fishing, because I've had a lot of steel ones fail.
And I think generally, say you're fishing pike and muskie, I don't think generally they care if there's wire leader. Yeah. Like, some fish are finicky, but I don't think pike and muskie generally are. So a lot of people are like, "Why are you using fluorocarbon? The fish don't care." It has literally nothing to do with invisibility. Like, a little bit, sure, that's nice that's an added feature, but it has to do with the fact that it's extremely abrasion resistant, and you can look at the leader and tell if it's damaged. You can't do that with wire sometimes. Sometimes if you get a kink, like you said, you can tell, oh, there's a kink here. If it straightens out, it might snap. But sometimes you'll get damage on your wire leader that you can't see. And then you'll set the hook and snap.
Because often they're nylon coated wire, like you said. Yeah. So yeah, the wire inside is broken, but the nylon outside looks fine. And yeah, it's toast.
Yeah,
so that will break.
Definitely good for fluorocarbon.
Yeah, you can visually inspect it. That's a good point. Now, you brought me back again. I forgot to mention about between fluorocarbon and mono, invisibility underwater. So fluorocarbon is the best line for invisibility in quotes. Monofilament is also not very visible underwater overall. If you're fishing like super gin clear, you're going to notice a difference if you switch to fluoro. Yes, because it is better. So essentially how they work is the light spectrum, the water refracts light at a certain degree. And so monofilament, I can't remember exactly. I think it's like 0.6 degrees off of water, whereas fluorocarbon is like 0.2 degrees. So it's much closer to the light refraction that water is naturally. That's why fluorocarbon appears invisible underwater. However, it does not match exactly. So yeah, if you have fluorocarbon in the water and you have if it was truly invisible, then you would have no issue running 500-pound fluorocarbon and it's invisible. No, at that point you're gonna see it because you'll notice that. So some fish, they can still be line shy if you're not careful, and a lot of it too isn't so much the line, but whether mono or fluoro, but it could very well be how it's affecting your presentation. So exactly. I know with steelheading, yeah, I know you've had experience, you have a lot more experience than that, but why don't you go ahead and talk about, I know you talked about before about leaders and switching to a lighter leader for better action. And it may not necessarily be the line itself, but
yeah, it's the diameter. So again, there's a lot of people that are like, fluorocarbon's a scam. Talk to any steelhead guy that fishes. You'll be hard pressed to find someone that doesn't use fluorocarbon. And, if you're talking about people that are, professional bass anglers or have TV shows and they're pumping product, yeah, you can see that they're pushing their product, but normal people down at the creek aren't pushing product. And guess what? Fishermen are cheap. We don't want to spend money on fluorocarbon, but everyone does. Why is that? It's because it works better. Yeah, that's the reality of it. So if you say fluorocarbon, is a scam, maybe, try to think outside your little opinion there, because people like us that don't want to spend high dollar for fluorocarbon, steelhead guys that drop shot smallmouth, they all do. Yeah. There must be a reason for that. So when you're steelhead fishing, I'm not that old, but I grew up when fluorocarbon was not really a thing for steelhead fishing. It was just kind of starting to get into it. People use monofilament leaders. Okay, they tie on, and again, they'd have to tie super wispy thin mono, 3-pound tests, some of them, and as soon as fluorocarbon became popular, it has all those features of it's abrasion resistant, Maybe mono is a little bit more abrasion resistant than fluorocarbon, but fluorocarbon's still really good. You get some nice Japanese fluorocarbon, it's good, but it's dense, it floats, it sinks down better, and it's pretty much not invisible, but like you said, but it's as close to invisible as you can get.
It is a lot less visible than mono, 100%.
Yeah, so say you're fishing steelhead and it's muddy water, it doesn't matter. Put on mono, it doesn't matter, because the abrasion resistance isn't going to matter. The fish can't see your line anyway. But in gin clear water, using fluorocarbon 100% gives you the edge. That's not my opinion. Ask anyone that steelhead fishes successfully. If you're chucking spoons off a pier for salmon, doesn't matter. Yeah. Those fish don't care. But if you're fishing steelhead, that's a big difference. Yeah. And diameter, like you said, makes a big difference. So I've had guys tell me, 12-pound fluorocarbon's just as invisible as 3-pound. It's like, it's not. And maybe even if it is, the diameter is what matters, right? So say you're drifting and you want to be as natural as possible. You're drifting down a little run. You have a single bead or a little fly or something, and you're running a thicker line. It's going to react different underwater. It's going to have more drag. It's going to be a lot more natural than if you're using 4-pound.
And because of that stiff line, if it's bouncing along, if you're bouncing it along the bottom of the rocks, like that little bead coming along, if you got a thick line, it's not going to have much movement. It's going to stay a lot more static through that water column as it drifts along.
It's very different. It's not as natural. So I'm not saying you have to use 3-pound line or 4-pound line, but using a thinner line, it makes it just that much more natural. And when you're fishing for steelhead, especially on pressured water, you fish the creeks now, there's 100 guys. There's 5 guys.
If you're having a tough day and you're fishing 10-pound fluoro leader, drop it down to 8 to 6.
You know what I do? It depends where you fish, because it's going to be different if you fish the Niagara or if you fish an East Trib. But I've had some of the best days on pressured water where I go up to a pool after 2 or 3 guys are leaving, and they're like, caught 1 or 2, but then they stopped biting a few hours ago. I'll go in there with 3-pound fluorocarbon leader. There's not a lot of snags in this pool, and I'll catch one on the 2nd or 3rd drift. Yeah. Because it's just different. It's more natural. It's just a super finesse. Now, I don't recommend using that thin of a leader all the time, but if it comes to it and it means that I can catch a fish, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Now, so what I want to do just quickly now at the end is I'm going to try and do some off-the-top questions here for you where see if we can apply what we've learned here. So I'm going to try and give we'll just see how it goes. So
is this like a test?
Not really. Okay. Sort of. I mean, yes. So is fluorocarbon less visible and more sensitive than mono?
Yes.
Correct. At the same time, to play devil's advocate here, if I'm fishing a Tannic Lake up in Algonquin Park, or up in the Muskoka area, and it's stained water, and I'm casting crankbaits, am I going to notice a difference between fishing mono and fluoro? Or am I going to catch more fish either way?
You won't notice a difference.
No. So this is where we want to use your, we want to teach you guys, all the listeners or viewers, to see what the line does, what it's better for in certain applications, essentially what its qualities are, so that you can make an informed decision. If you're going to your cottage and your cottage, is on a body of water or a river where it's stained water all the time, like it is in a lot of the northern lakes, then you don't really need to worry about having fluorocarbon if you don't want to spend that money and the fish are going to see the line. That's stained water. You could probably run straight braid and have no issue.
Yeah.
Even when we went to fishing on Algonquin Park, I ran straight braid that whole trip, and you were fishing leaders the whole time. And you were catching big bass. I was catching big bass.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It didn't make a difference.
Yeah. And to add to that, another thing I'd have to add after that is it's all about confidence.
Yeah.
So if you feel that, fluorocarbon is going to help you catch more fish, then buy fluorocarbon and use it, because confidence is everything. Yeah. So for instance, I like flipping jigs. A lot of guys fish braid. But a lot of people too fish 20-pound fluorocarbon. You know what? I'll tell you, I like fishing 20-pound fluorocarbon better. It casts better. It skips better. It's fun. I enjoy it more. I don't like that rough noise of braid. I like using 20-pound fluorocarbon. It has nothing to do with anything else other than the fact that I like to use it. So guess what? I use it. Yeah. Use what you like. 100%. Unless it's a dumb choice. Don't be topwater frog fishing with mono like Andrew. But
I've actually done that. So just a little tangent there. So can you fish, different lines for their not ideal circumstances? Absolutely. Can you catch fish in those ways? 100%. Jesse and I, we were fishing a body of water out in the Kawarthas, and he's got on his 60 pound braid.
I was 50.
50 pound. Okay. Oh, sorry. 50 pound braid. And he's pitching jigs where he's throwing frogs in like the slop. And there I am in my medium action spinning rod with 10 pound mono, like flicking my spider lure, actually, the one I'm thinking of. I flipped it underneath the dock. I'm like, watch this shot. And like, I nailed this like snipe shot under this dock, 6 feet back, through like multiple like horizontal dock pilings under this dock. So I knew that if I hooked something, I'd not only have to get it like out from it tangling around the dock pilings, but also over top of the horizontal supports. And I nailed this. What was it, like a 2.5 pound bass, 3 pound bass? No, that was like a 3 pound bass.
It was at least 3 pounds, and I have no clue how we got it out. It's like through the dock piling, and so I mean, you can do it.
I did it. Or a lot of the bass, I'd hook up with him out there, casting on a frog. But a lot of the time, we'd have to paddle right up to him
because you can't get him out.
Because you can't rip it out. So braid way superior in that scenario.
Yeah.
So always think about what the qualities of whatever you're fishing for, or whatever you're fishing with. So your rod, your reel, what is it capable of? How is it going to act? How is your line going to act? How's your lure going to act? If you can answer those questions, you're going to be way more prepared to have a better time on the water, catch more fish, and just have a more pleasurable experience, because you're not going to be fighting against these negative qualities about your gear that you're using when you're on the water. So I hope that was helpful for the fishing lines. We do have some time left for the AOA Q&A.
But before that, I just wanted to add, the first question you asked me is, what line would I pick?
What line would you pick, Jesse? If you had to run
if
one line.
If I had to pick one line for everything, braid to leader.
I agree.
You can do anything with braid to leader, and again, like we were talking about,
that's technically 2 lines.
Fair.
but
the
I
density
agree.
of
That's
fluorocarbon has its advantages, but braid to leader is good for anything. Like, I feel that if it came down to it for sensitivity, slackline detection, fluorocarbon will be more sensitive than braid to leader, 100%. Yeah. But generally, braid to leader is still sensitive.
The thing is, if you could put on a 20 yard leader if you wanted to.
Yeah,
so if you wanted to pitch, you could have your full backing of braid. You tie on an extra 20 feet of fluoro or 10 feet of fluoro. You're still going to have that direct contact. That's going to sync with whatever you're pitching with to the bottom. So that's a very good point. That's what I run mostly on my reels now is braid overall, except for my carp reel.
Yeah, why not?
And my salmon reel I run mono as well. But other than that, I run braid. And I only ever tie on leader when the water is clear. I run straight braid most of the time.
Yep. And you still catch fish.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd say braid or leader for sure. And learn to tie, well, we have another episode coming up about knots, but learn to tie a good knot.
Yep.
There's tons of good connection knots. You don't have to learn the FG knot, believe me. That's an overkill knot. It's a strong knot, but it's an overkill knot.
The Albright knot works. Is it Albright? What's the...
Yeah, the Albright knot.
Albright knot, yeah.
Or the Crazy Alberto knot. Like those...
Crazy Alberto, yeah.
Those knots
I
work
like
good
the
too.
Albright knot is really easy to learn, not hard to learn how to tie. And that works for tying any leader to any mainline material that I've found. And unless you're using something super thick.
And the secret is, if you learn to tie an Albright knot correctly, it won't break.
Yeah.
People make it sound like if you don't tie an FG knot, your knot's going to break.
Yeah.
It's like, nah. For years before the FG knot came out, we were tying the other knots and they were fine. But anyway.
We'll get naughty another episode.
There's another naughty episode coming up. So yeah. Anyway, that was interesting. I kind of understood how line was made. Like, braid is easy enough to understand that they weave stuff together, but like fluorocarbon and monofilament, how it's made, that's very interesting. And it really opened my mind to mono is still an option.
Yeah.
It's still an option. I think all these people, they just think you could never use mono. And you know what though? I've watched.
If you want to save money, you could even do a mono and then tie on a fluoro leader.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted that full stretch across the board, but you still want that, the fish not to see the first 3 feet of your line. By all means, just tying a fluoro leader. If you really wanted to, you could do that too.
Oh, 100%. And just to add to that, one YouTube channel you should definitely follow is Wired to Fish.
Yeah.
And amazing. I've been watching episodes here and there, and I watched an episode.
We aspire to make videos like Wired to Fish.
Amazing. But like, I was watching an episode and they were fishing, the guy was fishing jerk baits on a bait caster. And he's like, oh, I'm using this jerk bait rod, blah, 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 and 10-pound mono. And he was explaining why he was using mono and not fluorocarbon, because he didn't want to get his jerk bait down. Like, he didn't want the line to bring... A line will actually bring your jerk bait down a few extra feet.
Yep.
That's a fact. And he was using mono at 8 or 10, and he was catching big smallies on it. And another episode I was watching, They were fishing somewhere, and it was, the lakes in like Minnesota, they're very similar to the Kawartha. There's a lot of milfoil and stuff.
Yep.
And he was flipping tubes for a largemouth, and he was using 15-pound mono.
Yeah.
He's like, I can feel the bites good hook setting power. You just have to set the hook a little harder than if you're using braid. And it works. Like, it doesn't not work. People think that mono doesn't work. It does.
The good thing with mono too is when you're fighting a fish too, like to have that stretch all the way across the whole time when it's getting close to the boat, if it starts shaking its head and stuff, it's still got a lot of stretch in that line, which is really, really useful to prevent it from throwing that hook.
And we'll talk, 100%. And we'll talk about that in another episode about choosing the right rod, because like the line you use directly correlates with what kind of rod you can use. If you use a really stiff rod and a line that's really stiff, like braid that has no stretch, you're going to lose a lot of fish. So like, for instance, like I have a chatterbait rod. It's a slow action glass rod. That rod bends almost down to the handle, and I can use braid on it because the rod bends a lot. But if you're you're looking for a sensitive rod that doesn't have a lot of bend to it, like an extra fast, and you're using braid, the rod doesn't really load up that well, and you will lose a lot of fish at the boat side.
And same thing too, if you're using a soft rod and you're using mono or a stretchy line and you're casting frogs, you're gonna have to like do an insane hook set to launch those like big 4/0 hooks into the roof.
Oh,
of
you
a,
probably
of a
won't even
mouth.
get
Like
it
it's not gonna happen. So hopefully that has helped answer any of the kind of misnomers you've heard about different lines and whatnot. But we'll do some questions now on the AOA Q&A.
All right, so for the AOA Q&A, this week we actually got about 35. That's pretty good. 35 entries. But anyway, we're going to answer some of these for you. We're going to go quick. So this one's for Andrew. In your opinion, what is the hardest fighting freshwater fish? And this is B2 Fresh.
I would say either smallmouth or fresh steelhead.
Yeah.
I don't have much experience with steelhead, but the ones that I've hooked into, like it's insane. Like you'll never hook into something and have it cartwheel out of the air 5 times in a row, like instantly.
Well,
but
Atlantic do that.
Yeah. but smallmouth, pound for pound, I'm sure a lot of people agree are probably the best fighting fish in the freshwater world.
They're really hard. Those silver bullets.
Yeah.
I'd say Atlantics, I've caught a very small amount of them, but the ones that I caught were insane. They were like sticks of dynamite. All right. This is a interesting question here. Raw Milk Cheese, that's the Instagram account guy. His question is, do you fish the spring sucker run? I always used to as a kid, but not since. I used to. It's been a few. We went out about 3 years ago.
Yeah, we went a couple years ago. I did go out last spring. Took my wife out. Went for some suckers. Yeah, it's nice to get people introduced. Like I said, he did it as a kid. I think we both did it as kids.
I used to take my brother out for the sucker run, and there was a big pool that we used to fish, and it would fill with suckers. The whole bottom of the pool was like black, just all suckers. We just chuck a Durham out, and some of these suckers are big. Yeah. My biggest sucker I ever caught, I caught a 26-inch sucker.
That's insane.
I measured it. I was like, holy smoke, like 26-inch sucker. And you're catching them on an ultralight, a 6-pound test. But I think my favorite way to catch them is fly fishing for them. Yeah. You fish a little prince nymph or a little hare's ear, just down right on the bottom.
Get some dust shots in front of it to bring it right down.
And I never thought it would work. And dude, it works. Yeah. And you can sight fish for them and just get the fly right in front of their face, and you just see them like suck it up.
Egg sucking worms too. Those flies, those work well.
And they fight in the spring surprisingly well. Yeah. And I've never ate one myself, but my grandpa back in the day, he used to pickle suckers. Yeah. Like he'd catch them, he wouldn't even flay. Like the bone would still be in and everything, and he'd pickle it, and it would make the the bone dissolve. Urban Bass Toronto, his question was, your opinion. He has a 3, so we'll just go quick. Okay. Your opinion on bed fishing in Ontario? You think that should be legalized, or?
That's tough. Like for me, I feel bad about it because I do know how much that can affect the spawn. If it's a small and where I've seen it is like small ponds. If I was to go bed fish on a small pond where there's only less than 100, let's say, big breeding or good sized breeding bass, you pull off a bed. That's a big number of those eggs that'll most likely get eaten up by sunfish coming in, waiting on the outskirts of that bed, coming to get it. So depending on the fishery, if it can support it, I know like the St. Lawrence, they were doing that in the tournaments. I've listened to some of the podcasts about that. Yeah. Like for that fishery, I'm sure it can handle it. So 100%. For that, I'm fine. If it's a small body of water, I would probably personally I would avoid it just because I don't want to be one of the people that are responsible for future generations not being able to fish.
I'm 100% against bed fishing.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. I feel like the bass are at their most vulnerable state, and they're literally making babies that you can catch in the future.
I probably would never purposely go out to do it,
Yeah.
but at the same time, if you were fishing and there was still a bass on its bed and it was like an 8-pound bass and you're like, I want to catch it for the gram, would you not toss something at it?
And it was legal?
And it was legal?
It would be a hard temptation, I'll say that.
Yeah. At the same time, would I ever seek that out? Probably not.
Yeah. His second question, your opinions on using live scopes in tournaments. Again, we talked about this last time. Like,
if everyone has it, it's fair.
If everyone has it, it's fair. If you
if I was in that tournament, I'd be like, none of you can use it. I can't afford that.
Yeah. The only time I think live scope is unfair, so to say, and I don't mean to like play a little violin, but it's unfair for people who can't afford it.
Yeah.
Most people can't afford to spend $5,000-$6,000 on technology or electronics. But in tournaments where you're
that's
driving
your livelihood.
in an expensive
you take
boat,
every advantage you can. That's your livelihood.
Yeah. And maybe it's not big tournaments. Maybe you're just talking about like clubbies or like little tournaments.
Yeah.
Some guys can afford it, some guys can't. I can go either way. I don't really care. I feel like if you have it and you know to use it properly, you can be deadly with it. But some people have it and just don't know how to use it. So
That's true.
you still have to catch the fish.
Yep.
I don't really have an opinion on it because it's something that I'll never own and it doesn't affect me personally.
At least not in your, until it drops down in price. I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
We're not gonna have one.
Hey, if it was affordable, 100% I'd buy it.
Yeah.
But anyway, his last question. This doesn't count as 3 entries, by the way.
Yes.
Bass versus Major League Fishing. So I'll explain it to Andrew because I kind of follow the tournaments a little bit. Bass is like, Bassmaster, the guys catch the biggest 5 fish and they keep the fish in the live well and they go to the weigh-in and they hold the 5 biggest fish. And it's like, that's the format is to catch 5 biggest fish. Major League Fishing is like, you don't keep 5.
There's a person in the boat with them, right?
And they weigh it. So you catch a fish. It used to be like minimum 12 inches. Now I think it's minimum 2 pounds.
Cool.
It's like 2 pounds and up, and then you just rack the weight up all day long.
Cool.
So, and the fish, I like the point of MFL because the fish are treated very respectfully. Like you get fish handling violations if the fish touches the boat.
Yeah.
If it touches the floor, fish handling violation. I like the fact, I don't like how fish are banging around in a live well all day as they're driving around.
The kill rate on that is pretty high too. Like when they're in those live wells, a lot better than it used to be.
Yeah.
But at the same
time,
fatalities. There's fatalities.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot less in the MFL rules.
So for the bass, for the actual fish, MFL is way better. But for Bassmaster, I feel like it's better because like you're not seeing the weights increase all day, so it's more of like who's gonna win. It's more exciting, and then you actually have the live weigh-in where everyone's holding up the big fish. That's what the people want.
Yeah, it's cool because the bass you're gonna have, like you're getting your 5 biggest fish, so everyone's targeting large, not large on bass, just large fish.
Yeah,
I kind of like the other one too, where it's kind of like how I go out and I fish. Like, I'm not casting giant swim baits, or not that they do either, but I'm not only aiming for large fish when I go out. I'd love to catch some big ones, and I'll try and use my skills in order to achieve that. But at the same time, I love catching like a bunch. If I have a 100 fish day and none of them break 3 pounds, that was a great day. That's an amazing day. So to see like the pros doing that same thing on lakes, for me, that's exciting to see.
But does it take more skill to catch a bunch of 2-pounders than it does to catch like 5 or 6 or 7 pounders?
It takes way more skill, I would say, to catch the 5, like to get a 25-pound bag or a 30-pound bag. It's like, that's insane. Like that is something I am nowhere close to achieving. Like that is way harder of a skill.
Yeah, it's more. I find Bassmaster more impressive. But
as for the
all that
ethical
stuff,
side of it, I do like just weighing the fish back in the water. You're not pulling it off of its area, and I think that's cool.
Last question because we're running out of time here. Yeah. Tackle Box Tony, best reel brands. Honestly, I've used a lot of reel brands. The ones that I have the least problems with, Shimano and Daiwa.
Yeah.
They're a little more expensive, but they're actually engineered in their own factories. Like me and Andrew were talking. We were just at Gagnon's before this, playing with some of the reels. I own Abu's.
I've had Abu before. My first reel I actually went and bought was an Abu Garcia spinning reel.
Yeah.
And I still have that thing. It's a little wonky now, but I've had it for almost
and I'm
20
not saying
years.
They make bad reels. I've owned them. I wouldn't buy them again. Now we have to announce the winner for last week's giveaway, which is the Lunker Hunt Spider. Andrew has the random number generator on his phone, and the number was 35 entries. So tell me the number.
30?
Yeah.
Okay. 28.
28. Oh my goodness. So this was not a question that we actually had time to answer today, but that just goes to show if you ask a question, even if we don't talk about it, you can still win the prize. And the prize was actually from Wham Baits Canada. So nice. Wham Baits, we're actually excited to see him at CanCast.
Yeah.
Wham Baits, you sir have won Lunker Hunt Spider, and we will get that to you real soon. Again, we're going to have a giveaway fairly regularly. And again, if you're a brand or own a company and you have fishing related products and you'd like to sponsor a giveaway, please send us an email or message us directly on Instagram, and we'll get you all set up. We're actually starting our sponsor giveaways next month. So we're excited about that. And the slots actually are filling up pretty quick. So if you want to get in before the summertime, then definitely let us know.
Yep. So thanks a lot for listening. Before we sign off, we just want to let you know we really appreciate you listening to the podcast. We really appreciate you following us on Instagram, subscribing to the podcast, viewing it on YouTube, subscribing to our YouTube channel. We can be found everywhere at just by searching Average Ontario Anglers. You'll recognize our blue logo there. So if we love to get feedback as well. So if you want to reach out to Jesse or myself, Instagram is probably the best way to do that, where we can be easily reached. We both also have Jesse's oftentimes on AOA itself. If you want to reach me directly for, I don't know what reason you would have to do that, but I'm also at AOA _Andrew. So that's generally who you're going to reach when you respond to either of those accounts. But we love to get feedback from you guys. We love the support that we've already heard from the community and the
please
buzz.
Write us a review.
Yes, write us a review. That helps a lot. So thank you for showing us your support. Thanks for listening, and hope you guys have a great time in the water this year.
And we'll see you next episode.